Randy Porter's manhood had never caused an interplanetary incident before, until now. The human soldier lay strapped to a cold metal examination table in the sterile confines of a PAC-led research facility on Zeta-9. His captors, the squat, technologically challenged aliens, had taken him prisoner during a recent skirmish. Now he found himself at the mercy of their crude attempts at scientific inquiry. Dr. Kroll, the lead PAC-led scientist, loomed over Randy with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The doctor's assistant, a young female PAC-led named Orion, approached with scanning equipment. Her inexperience was evident in her tentative movements and wide-eyed stares at the human specimen before her. As Orion began her examination, her gaze fixated on an unexpected protrusion between Randy's legs. Her eyes widened in alarm. In her limited understanding of human anatomy, this peculiar appendage could only be one thing: a concealed weapon. Panic seized Orion. She slammed her hand on a nearby console, triggering a facility-wide alarm. Red lights flashed and sirens wailed throughout the complex. PAC-led security forces mobilized, their heavy footsteps echoing down the corridors. Randy, bewildered by the sudden commotion, attempted to explain. "Wait, it's not what you think," he shouted, but the language barrier rendered his protest meaningless to the frenzied PAC-leds. Dr. Kroll, initially startled, quickly assessed the situation. A sly grin spread across his face as he realized the potential of this misunderstanding. Here was an opportunity to justify more invasive examinations, to extract valuable military intelligence from their human captive. As chaos engulfed the facility, Orion's fascination with Randy's alien physiology grew. She found herself questioning the PAC-led propaganda she'd been fed about humans. Risking severe punishment, she discreetly accessed restricted files on human biology, her curiosity outweighing her fear of repercussions. Randy endured increasingly uncomfortable tests, acutely aware of the growing tension in the room. He noticed Orion's furtive glances and sensed her burgeoning curiosity. In her, he saw a potential ally, a glimmer of hope for escape. Outside the examination room, the PAC-led High Command demanded immediate results. Reports of a possible new human weapon had reached their ears, and they were eager to gain an advantage in the ongoing war. Dr. Kroll felt the pressure mounting, knowing that failure could mean severe consequences for him and his team. Unbeknownst to the PAC-leds, a human rescue mission was already in motion. A strike team prepared to infiltrate the research facility, their determination fueled by the need to retrieve their comrade and prevent any potential intelligence leaks. As the hours ticked by, the fate of Randy Porter hung in the balance. The misunderstanding sparked by his anatomy had set in motion a chain of events that could alter the course of the human PAC-led war. The evolving dynamic between Randy and Orion held the key to his survival and possible escape. In this alien laboratory, amidst the chaos of alarms and the tension of impending conflict, Randy Porter found himself at the center of an interstellar incident, all because of a biological feature the PAC-leds had never encountered before, a feature that, in the right circumstances, could prove just as potent as any weapon. The chaos in the PAC-led research facility intensified as Dr. Kroll, emboldened by the potential military significance of his captive, escalated his examination methods. Randy Porter gritted his teeth as the cold metal instruments probed his body, each test more invasive than the last. The PAC-led scientist's eyes gleamed with a mixture of scientific curiosity and barely concealed sadism. "You will reveal your secrets, human," Dr. Kroll muttered, adjusting a device that sent waves of discomfort through Randy's body. "This weapon of yours, it will be ours." Randy bit back a retort, focusing instead on memorizing every detail of his surroundings. He noted the layout of the room, the positioning of the security cameras, and the access panel by the door that required a specific sequence to open. Despite the pain, his mind remained sharp, collecting valuable intelligence that could aid in his escape. In the adjacent room, Orion hunched over a console, her fingers flying across the alien keyboard, as she delved deeper into restricted human biological data. Her eyes widened as she absorbed information that contradicted everything she'd been taught about humans. The complexity of their anatomy, the intricacies of their social structures, the depth of their emotions, it all fascinated her. As the facility's security measures tightened, Orion found herself spending more time in the lab. During a lull in Dr. Kroll's experiments, she approached Randy's examination table, her curiosity overcoming her initial fear. Randy watched the young Pakled cautiously. He had noticed her furtive glances and sensed her growing interest. Seizing the opportunity, he began to gesture, pointing to various parts of his body, and then to the corresponding Pakled anatomy. Orion's eyes lit up with understanding. She mimicked his actions, then hesitantly reached for a nearby datapad. With quick, nervous movements, she sketched a crude diagram of human anatomy, pointing questioningly at the area that had caused such alarm. Randy nodded emphatically, then shook his head and made a slashing motion across his throat, trying to convey that it wasn't a weapon. Orion's brow furrowed as she struggled to comprehend this new information. Their rudimentary communication was interrupted by the sudden arrival of General Zork. The imposing Pakled military leader stormed into the lab, his face contorted with impatience and disdain. "Dr. Kroll," Zork bellowed, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. "The High Command grows weary of your lack of progress. You promised us a weapon, yet all I see is a helpless human strapped to a table." Dr. Kroll's usual confidence faltered in the face of Zork's fury. "General, I assure you, we are on the brink of a breakthrough. The human anatomy is complex, but—" "Enough excuses," Zork interrupted, his eyes narrowing as they fell on Randy. "If your methods are inadequate, perhaps it's time for a more direct approach." The general's words sent a chill through the room. Even Dr. Kroll looked uneasy as Zork outlined his plans for a series of invasive surgeries. Orion, listening from her workstation, felt her stomach churn with horror. As preparations for the surgery began, Orion knew she had to act. Her newfound understanding of human biology told her that such invasive procedures could be fatal. In a moment of decisive action, she deliberately overloaded a nearby console, causing it to spark and smoke. Alarms blared throughout the facility as Pakled security forces rushed to contain the potential threat. In the ensuing chaos, Orion slipped a small device into Randy's hand, quickly demonstrating its activation with a series of gestures. Randy's eyes widened in understanding. As soon as the Pakleds were distracted by the malfunctioning equipment, he activated the device. A soft beep confirmed that a signal had been sent. Miles away in the dense jungle surrounding the Pakled facility, Captain Sarah Gordon's head snapped up as her communication unit crackled to life. A grin spread across her face as she turned to her team. "We've got a location," she announced, her voice tight with anticipation. "Prep for immediate insertion. Our window won't stay open for long." The 5-person team moved with practiced efficiency, checking weapons and adjusting their stealth gear. They had spent days scouting the facility's defenses, and now it was time to put their plan into action. As they approached the outer perimeter, Gordon held up a hand, signaling her team to halt. Ahead, Pakled guards patrolled with increased frequency, a sign that something had disrupted the facility's normal routine. "Change of plans," Gordon whispered, her eyes scanning the reinforced walls. "We'll use the chaos inside to our advantage. Jensen, you're on point. Torres, watch our 6. Let's move." Inside the facility, General Zork raged at the security breach, barking orders at harried Pakled technicians. Dr. Kroll hovered anxiously nearby, torn between fear of the general's wrath and concern for his research. Randy lay still on the examination table, every muscle tense as he waited for the right moment. He caught Orion's eye across the room, seeing the conflict and drive in her gaze. In that moment, he knew he had found an unexpected ally in this alien world. As klaxons wailed and Pakled forces scrambled to secure the facility, the stage was set for a confrontation that would shape the future of human-Pakled relations. The rescue team drew closer, Zork's patience wore thinner, and the fate of Randy Porter hung in the balance. The interplanetary incident, sparked by a simple misunderstanding, was about to explode into something far more significant. The chaos engulfing the Pakled research facility provided Randy Porter with the opening he needed. As alarms blared and red lights flashed, he felt the small device Orion had slipped into his hand. With a quick series of movements, he activated it, sending out a brief but crucial distress signal. Miles away, Captain Sarah Gordon's comm unit crackled to life. Her eyes narrowed as she deciphered the incoming coordinates. "We've got him," she announced to her team, her voice tight with urgency. "Move out, now!" Inside the facility, General Zork's rage echoed through the sterile corridors. "Lockdown! Now!" he bellowed, his face contorted with fury. "Dr. Kroll, find the traitor responsible for this breach, or you'll share their fate." Dr. Kroll's usual confidence crumbled under the general's withering glare. He turned to his staff, eyes darting from face to face. "Everyone, workstations! We'll run a full security check on all personnel." Orion felt her heart race as she watched Dr. Kroll approach her station. She knew her time was running out. With a deep breath, she made her decision. Her fingers flew across the control panel, inputting a complex sequence of codes. Randy's eyes widened as the restraints holding him to the examination table suddenly retracted. He sat up, muscles tense, ready for action. Orion appeared at his side, her voice low and urgent. "You must go now. I'll create another distraction." For a moment, Randy hesitated. He looked at Orion, seeing the fear and purpose in her eyes. Something stirred within him, a feeling he couldn't quite name. But before he could respond, Dr. Kroll's voice cut through the air. "General, it's the girl. Orion is the traitor." Zork's response was immediate and chilling. "Arrest her. She'll be executed for this betrayal." Randy's military training kicked in, overriding his momentary indecision. He grabbed Orion's arm, pulling her close. "I'm not leaving you behind," he said, his voice firm. "We're getting out of here together." Using the knowledge he'd gained during his captivity, Randy led Orion through the labyrinthine corridors of the facility. They ducked into shadowy alcoves as Packlet patrols rushed past, their heavy footfalls echoing in the metallic hallways. Outside, Captain Gordon's team encountered the facility's enhanced security measures. "Jensen, Torres, take point," she ordered, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find a way through these defenses. Fast." Back inside, Randy and Orion reached a junction. Packlet voices approached from both directions. Randy's eyes darted around, searching for an escape route. He spotted a maintenance hatch overhead. With a grunt of effort, he forced it open and helped Orion climb through before pulling himself up. They crawled through the narrow maintenance shaft, the sound of pursuit growing fainter. Randy's muscles ached from the confinement, but he pushed on, Orion close behind him. Finally, they reached another hatch. Randy peered through the grating, seeing the central security hub below. Dr. Kroll and General Zork stood at a control panel, their voices raised in argument. "Find them!" Zork demanded, smacking his fist on the console. "Or I'll have your head along with theirs." Randy's mind raced, formulating a plan. He noticed a cluster of power conduits running along the ceiling of the hub. With careful precision, he maneuvered himself into position and delivered a powerful kick to the grating. The metal cover crashed onto the control panel below, sending sparks flying. In the same instant, Randy dropped into the room, landing in a combat-ready stance. Before the stunned pack leads could react, he surged forward, his fist connecting with Dr. Kroll's jaw. Orion followed close behind, using her knowledge of the systems to initiate a facility-wide power surge. Lights flickered and security systems faltered as the overload coursed through the circuitry. Taking advantage of the confusion, Randy overpowered the guards and freed Orion from her captors. Together, they fought their way through the facility, Randy's combat skills perfectly complementing Orion's insider knowledge. As they neared an exit, a heavily armed squad blocked their path. General Zork stood at its center, his eyes blazing with fury. "So," he snarled, "the human and the traitor united. You'll both pay for this humiliation." Randy pushed Orion behind him, his muscles tensing for the fight ahead. But before either side could make a move, a deafening explosion rocked the facility. Chunks of debris rained down as a section of the wall collapsed, revealing Captain Gordon and her team, weapons at the ready. "Porter!" Gordon shouted over the din of battle. "Time to go home!" The room erupted into chaos as human and Pakled forces clashed. Randy and Orion found themselves caught in the crossfire, ducking and weaving through the melee. A stray energy blast grazed Randy's arm, causing him to stumble. Without hesitation, Orion grabbed him, pulling him behind a fallen console. She examined his wound with surprising gentleness, her touch sending an unexpected shiver through Randy's body. "We need to move," Randy said, gritting his teeth against the pain. "Can you get us to the data core? We can't let them destroy the research." Orion nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and perseverance. As they made their way through the battle-torn facility, Dr. Kroll's voice echoed over the intercom, ordering an emergency data purge. Time was running out. Randy and Orion raced towards the heart of the facility, their fates intertwined in ways neither could have imagined when this ordeal began. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew more intense as Captain Gordon's team pushed deeper into the complex. The future of human pack-led relations hung in the balance, with Randy and Orion at its center. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves face-to-face with another group of pack-led soldiers. Randy raised his makeshift weapon, Orion tensed at his side, and the air crackled with the potential for violence. Violence. Randy's muscles tensed, ready for action. He glanced at Orion, noting the drive in her eyes. In that split second of shared understanding, the world around them erupted into chaos. Energy blasts sizzled through the air, scorching the walls and forcing Randy and Orion to dive for cover. The acrid smell of ozone filled their nostrils as they crouched behind a fallen console. Randy's combat instincts kicked in, his eyes darting around the room, assessing threats and searching for escape routes. "We need to move," he shouted over the din of battle. "Any ideas?" Orion's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "The maintenance tunnels. They run throughout the facility. We can use them to avoid the main corridors." No sooner had she spoken than a stray energy blast struck dangerously close, showering them with sparks. Randy winced as a burning sensation flared in his arm. Looking down, he saw a nasty gash where the blast had grazed him. Orion's eyes widened at the sight of his injury. "You're hurt," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I'll live," Randy grunted, pushing aside the pain. "Let's go." They made a mad dash across the room, ducking and weaving through the crossfire. Randy's military training served him well, allowing him to anticipate and avoid incoming fire. Orion matched his movements with surprising agility, her knowledge of the facility guiding their path. As they reached a maintenance hatch, the facility's intercom crackled to life. Dr. Kroll's voice, tinged with panic, echoed through the corridors. "Attention all personnel. Initiate emergency lockdown procedures. Purge all sensitive data immediately." Randy and Orion exchanged worried glances. "We can't let them destroy the research," Randy said, his voice firm. "It's too important." Orion nodded, her face set with tenacity. "I know a shortcut to the main data core, but we'll have to move fast." They crawled through the cramped maintenance tunnels, the sounds of battle growing more distant. The narrow space was thick with dust and the acrid smell of overheated circuitry. Randy's injured arm throbbed with each movement, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. As they navigated the labyrinth of tunnels, Orion's presence beside him became a source of comfort. Her calm efficiency and unwavering focus helped steady his nerves. Despite the dire circumstances, Randy found himself marveling at the unlikely alliance they had formed. Suddenly, Orion halted. "Wait," she whispered, her ear pressed against the tunnel wall. "I hear something." They listened intently. The muffled sound of voices and hurried footsteps filtered through the metal. Orion's eyes widened in recognition. "It's Dr. Kroll and General Zork. They're heading for the main laboratory." Randy's mind raced. "That's probably where they're keeping the most valuable data. Can you get us there?" Orion nodded, already changing course. They moved with renewed urgency, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. As they neared their destination, Randy's injury began to take its toll. His movement slowed and a sheen of sweat covered his face. Orion noticed his labored breathing and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You need medical attention," she said, her voice filled with concern. Randy shook his head stubbornly. "We don't have time. The data—" His words were cut short as a violent tremor shook the facility. The tunnel around them groaned ominously, dust and debris raining down on their heads. "What was that?" Randy coughed, waving away the dust. Orion's face paled. "The human rescue team. They must have breached the outer defenses." Another explosion rocked the facility. Closer this time, the tunnel's structural integrity began to fail, metal panels buckling under the stress. "We need to get out of here," Randy shouted, pushing through the pain in his arm. They scrambled towards the nearest exit hatch, the tunnel collapsing behind them. With a final burst of effort, Randy kicked open the hatch and they tumbled out into a dimly lit corridor. As they caught their breath, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed from both directions. Randy tensed, ready for another fight, but his vision swam from the pain and exertion. Orion quickly assessed the situation. "This way," she urged, supporting Randy as they moved towards a nearby door. They burst into the room, finding themselves in the facility's medical bay. A group of startled Pac-led scientists looked up from their work, eyes wide with surprise. Among them, an older female Pac-led stepped forward, her gaze moving from Orion to Randy's injured arm. "Orion, what's happening?" Orion's voice was filled with a mix of relief and urgency. "Dr. Lyra, please, we need your help." Dr. Lyra hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Bring him to the examination table. Quickly now." As Dr. Lyra began treating Randy's wound, Orion moved to a nearby computer terminal. Her fingers flew across the keys, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. "What are you doing?" Randy asked, wincing as Dr. Lyra cleaned his injury. "Dr. Kroll's data purge was incomplete," Orion explained, her eyes fixed on the screen. "I can still access critical information about human biology, including the truth about your misidentified weapon." Randy's eyes widened in understanding. That could change everything. As Orion worked to download the data, Randy's treatment neared completion. The sound of battle grew closer, and tension filled the air. The Pac-led scientists huddled together, casting nervous glances at the doors. Suddenly, the doors burst open. Captain Sarah Gordon and her team rushed in, weapons raised. At the same moment, alarms blared throughout the facility, and the heavy footsteps of General Zork's forces could be heard approaching from the opposite direction. Randy stood, positioning himself between the human rescue team and the Pac-led scientists. "Wait!" he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Don't shoot!" Captain Gordon's eyes narrowed, taking in the scene before her. "Porter? What the hell is going on here?" Before Randy could respond, the doors on the far side of the medical bay began to buckle under the assault of General Zork's troops. Time was running out. In that moment of crisis, Randy made a decision that would change the course of human Pac-led relations forever. He grabbed the data storage device from Orion and tossed it to Captain Gordon. "Get that information to High Command," he urged. "It's vital for understanding the Pac-leds. I'll stay behind with Orion and buy you time to escape." Captain Gordon caught the device, her expression a mix of confusion and reluctance. "Porter, we came here to rescue you." Randy shook his head, his voice firm. "This is bigger than me now. Trust me, Captain. This is the right call." As General Zork's forces began to breach the doors, Dr. Lyra stepped forward. "There's an emergency evacuation tunnel behind that storage unit," she said, pointing. "It will lead you out of the facility." Captain Gordon hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded sharply. "All right, people, move out," she ordered her team. She turned to the Pac-led scientists. "Anyone who wants to come with us, now's your chance." As the human rescue team and several Pac-led defectors disappeared into the hidden tunnel, Randy and Orion stood side by side, facing the entrance. The doors finally gave way, and General Zork burst into the room, flanked by his soldiers. The Pac-led commander's eyes widened in shock as he took in the scene before him. Randy and Orion stood united, their fingers intertwined in a gesture of defiance and solidarity. "What is the meaning of this?" Zork bellowed, his face contorted with rage. Randy squared his shoulders, meeting the general's gaze with unwavering perseverance. Beside him, Orion stood tall, her presence a source of strength and drive. As they faced the uncertain future together, the consequences of their actions began to ripple outward, setting in motion events that would reshape the relationship between humans and Pac-leds for generations to come. The tension in the medical bay was palpable as Randy and Orion faced General Zork and his troops. The Pac-led commander's eyes darted between them, his face contorting with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Seize them!" Zork bellowed, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. In an instant, Randy and Orion were surrounded. Despite their defiant stance, they were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer number of pack-led soldiers. Randy felt the sting of an energy restraint as it clamped around his wrists, while Orion was roughly grabbed by two burly guards. "Take the human to the high-security detention block," Zork ordered, his eyes narrowing as he turned to Orion. "And you, traitor, will be confined to your quarters until I decide what to do with you." As they were dragged apart, Randy caught Orion's gaze one last time. In that fleeting moment, he saw a mix of fear and resilience in her eyes that mirrored his own emotions. The journey to the detention block was a blur of steel corridors and harsh, flickering lights. Randy's mind raced, trying to process the rapid turn of events. The cell they threw him into was barely large enough for him to lie down, with no furnishings save for a hard metal bench bolted to the wall. Hours passed, marked only by the rhythmic hum of the facility's power systems. Randy's thoughts turned to Orion, wondering about her fate and the consequences of their actions. He couldn't shake the image of her standing beside him, united against Zork's fury. Meanwhile, Orion paced her quarters, her movements watched by ever-present security cameras. The familiar space now felt like a prison, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She replayed the events in her mind, searching for any detail that might help their situation. Days blurred together as Randy endured a relentless cycle of interrogations. General Zork personally oversaw many of the sessions, his questions growing increasingly pointed and aggressive. "Tell me about Earth's defense systems," Zork demanded, looming over Randy. "What are your military's true capabilities?" Randy remained silent, his face hardened against the pain of his still-healing injury. Zork's frustration mounted with each failed attempt to extract information. In a nearby laboratory, Dr. Kroll pored over the data from Randy's initial capture, searching for any advantage. His eyes lit up as he stumbled upon an idea, one that might salvage his position and unlock the secrets of human biology. "General Zork," Kroll said, his voice tinged with excitement as he entered the commander's office. "I believe I've found a way to make the human talk." Zork leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Go on." "We've observed an unusual connection between the human and Orion," Kroll explained. "I propose we use this bond to our advantage. By manipulating their interactions, we may be able to extract valuable intelligence and potentially weaponize their connection." Zork considered the proposal, weighing the potential gains against the risks. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Doctor. Proceed with your experiment, but I want results, and quickly." The next day, Randy was surprised to find himself being led not to the interrogation room, but to a large, open chamber filled with strange equipment. His heart raced as he saw Orion being brought in from another entrance. "Randy!" she called out, her voice a mixture of relief and concern. Before he could respond, they were both secured to separate examination tables. Dr. Kroll approached, flanked by a team of pack-led scientists. "Now," Kroll said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation, "we will unlock the secrets of your species' weapon." As the experiments began, Randy and Orion found themselves subjected to a battery of tests and observations. Kroll and his team monitored their vital signs, brain activity, and physiological responses as they were brought into close proximity. What the pack-led scientists failed to understand was that the reactions they were observing were not the activation of some hidden weapon, but the genuine emotional response of two beings who had forged a deep connection through shared adversity. Days turned into weeks as the experiments continued. Randy and Orion, though often physically separated, developed a subtle system of communication through glances, gestures, and unspoken understanding. This silent language became their lifeline, a way to share strength and plan for a future they could only hope would come. Dr. Kroll, oblivious to the true nature of their connection, became increasingly excited by the data he was collecting. He theorized about the potential for humans to influence pack-led physiology, a concept that both thrilled and terrified him. As Kroll's experiments progressed, General Zork grew impatient with the lack of concrete military intelligence. In a desperate bid for results, he brought in Madame Vox, a notorious pack-led psychic known for her brutal efficiency in extracting information. The elderly Pakled woman arrived with an air of quiet menace. Her penetrating gaze seemed to pierce through Randy and Orion as she prepared for her first session. "Your minds cannot hide the truth from me," Madame Vox intoned, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality that sent chills down Randy's spine. As the psychic began her invasive mental probes, Randy gritted his teeth against the searing pain in his head. He could sense Orion's distress as well, their shared suffering creating a bond that even Madame Vox's powers couldn't fully penetrate. What the pack-led psychic discovered in their minds, however, was far from what she expected. The depth of emotion, the complexity of their relationship, and the strength of their connection challenged everything she thought she knew about humans and pack-leds alike. Shaken by her findings, Madame Vox retreated to her quarters, her worldview irrevocably altered. She kept her discoveries to herself, unsure of how to proceed with information that could upend the very foundations of pack-led society. As the experiments and interrogations continued, tensions within the facility began to rise. The arrival of Admiral Kraz, Supreme Commander of the pack-led fleet, added a new layer of complexity to the already volatile situation. Kraz strode into the facility, his imposing presence immediately commanding attention. "General Zork," he boomed, "I require a full briefing on the situation with the human prisoner and the traitor." As Zork scrambled to appease his superior, Randy and Orion exchanged a knowing glance. Something had shifted in the balance of power, and with it came a glimmer of hope for their future. Little did they know that far beyond the walls of their prison, forces were aligning that would soon bring their ordeal to a dramatic head. Captain Gordon and her team, bolstered by the knowledge and assistance of Dr. Lyra, were even now planning their daring return to the pack-led facility. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not only their fate, but potentially the future of human pack-led relations. As night fell on the alien world of Zeta 9, Randy and Orion clung to their bond, their shared strength, the only certainty in an uncertain future. As night fell on the alien world of Zeta 9, Randy and Orion clung to their bond, their shared strength the only certainty in an uncertain future. The arrival of Admiral Kraz, however, was about to upend everything they thought they knew. The facility buzzed with nervous energy as the Supreme Commander of the pack-led fleet strode through its corridors. His boots echoed against the metal floors, a sound that sent subordinates scurrying out of his path. When he reached the main control room, his eyes narrowed at the sight of General Zork and Dr. Kroll. "Report!" Kraz demanded, his voice a low rumble that filled the room. Zork straightened, his face a mask of forced confidence. "Admiral, we have made significant progress in our interrogation of the human prisoner, and—" "Enough!" Kraz cut him off with a wave of his hand. "I want to see them, both of them, now!" Minutes later, Randy and Orion found themselves brought before the imposing figure of Admiral Kraz. Randy's wrists ached from the energy restraints, while Orion stood tall despite the obvious fear in her eyes. Kraz studied them silently, his gaze piercing. "I've heard interesting things about you two," he said finally. "Things that could change the course of this war." Before either could respond, Madame Vox glided into the room. The elderly psychic's presence sent a chill through the air. "Admiral," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there is something you must know." As Vox revealed her discoveries about the depth of Randy and Orion's connection, Kraz's expression shifted from skepticism to intrigue. He leaned forward, his attention fully captured. "This changes everything," Kraz muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He turned to face Randy and Orion directly. "Your bond. It could be the key to ending this conflict." Randy's heart raced. He glanced at Orion, seeing his own mix of hope and apprehension mirrored in her eyes. Kraz continued, "I propose we use you as diplomatic envoys. Open a channel for peace talks with your government." The room erupted into chaos. General Zork's face contorted with rage. "This is madness," he shouted. "We cannot show weakness to the humans." In the ensuing argument, Randy felt a subtle shift in the energy restraints around his wrists. He looked down to see Orion discreetly manipulating the control panel. With a soft click, the restraints deactivated. Before anyone could react, alarms blared throughout the facility. A voice crackled over the intercom. Security breach in sectors 7 through 12. Unknown intruders detected. Amidst the confusion, Randy and Orion seized their chance. They bolted for the door, slipping out into the corridor as pack-led officers scrambled to respond to the multiple crises unfolding around them. This way, Orion whispered, guiding Randy through a maze of corridors. Her intimate knowledge of the facility proved invaluable as they navigated the chaos. They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a group of young pack-led scientists. Instead of raising the alarm, one of them stepped forward. "Are you trying to escape?" he asked in a hushed tone. When Randy nodded, the scientist continued, "We want to help. We don't believe in this war anymore." Meanwhile, in another part of the facility, Captain Sarah Gordon and her team moved silently through the shadows. Dr. Lyra, the defected pack-led scientist, led them past security checkpoints with practiced ease. "The central control room should be just ahead," Lyra whispered. "From there, we can—" A massive explosion rocked the facility, cutting off her words. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the corridor into darkness. "That wasn't us," Gordon muttered, activating her night vision gear. "Something's gone wrong." Back in the heart of the facility, General Zork stood before a bank of monitors, his face illuminated by the glow of emergency lighting. "If I can't have control," he snarled, "then no one will." His fingers danced across a console, overriding safety protocols and pushing the facility's power core to critical levels. Admiral Kraz burst into the room, flanked by loyal officers. "Stand down, Zork," he commanded. "You'll destroy us all." Zork spun to face him, a mad gleam in his eyes. "Better destruction than surrender." As the two pack-led leaders grappled for control, the facility shuddered around them. Warning klaxons blared, announcing the imminent meltdown of the power core. Through the chaos-filled corridors, Randy and Orion raced hand in hand. They could feel the heat building, hear the ominous groaning of overstressed metal. Behind them, their unlikely allies, the group of young pack-led scientists, struggled to keep up. "We need to get to engineering," Orion shouted over the din. "It's our only chance to stop this." As they approached the engineering sector, they saw another group converging on the same location, Captain Gordon and her rescue team. "Porter," Gordon called out, relief evident in her voice. "Are you all right?" Before Randy could respond, Dr. Kroll's voice came over the facility-wide communication system. "Attention all personnel. A unique biochemical reaction has been detected between the human and pack-led subjects. This could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies compatibility. All data must be preserved." Randy and Orion exchanged a look of confusion and wonder, but there was no time to dwell on this revelation. The ground beneath their feet trembled, a stark reminder of the impending catastrophe. As they reached the entrance to the engineering sector, they found themselves face to face with Admiral Kraz and his loyalists approaching from the opposite direction. For a moment, humans and pack-led stood frozen, weapons half raised. Then Kraz stepped forward, his expression grim but determined. "We don't have time for this," he said. "If we don't work together, none of us will survive." Randy nodded, extending his hand to the pack-led admiral. "Then let's get to work." Together, the unlikely alliance pushed into the engineering sector. Screens flashed red warnings, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the power building within the facility's core. As pack-led engineers and human specialists rushed to control panels, Randy and Orion found themselves at the heart of the crisis. Their unique bond, the very thing that had brought them to this point, now held the potential to save not just themselves, but everyone in the facility, and perhaps change the course of human pack-led relations forever. The core's containment field flickered dangerously. Time was running out. With shared glances and unspoken understanding, Randy and Orion placed their hands on the main control interface. As their fingers intertwined, a soft glow began to emanate from the point of contact. As their fingers intertwined, a soft glow began to emanate from the point of contact, spreading across the control interface. The sudden luminescence caught everyone off guard, but there was no time to ponder its significance. "Core temperature critical," a pack-led engineer shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of alarms. Randy's military training kicked in. his mind clearing as adrenaline surged through his body. He scanned the room, quickly assessing the situation and the resources at hand. "We need to reroute power from non-essential systems," he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Orion, can you guide the pack-led team to shut down secondary grids?" Orion nodded, her eyes locked with Randy's for a brief moment before she turned to the pack-led engineers. She began translating Randy's instructions, her words bridging the gap between human and pack-led technology. Captain Gordon, observing from the makeshift command center with Admiral Kraz, leaned in to speak. "Your man Porter's got a good head on his shoulders," she remarked, her tone a mix of pride and concern. Kraz grunted in agreement, his eyes never leaving the frantic activity before them. "Indeed, perhaps there is more to learn from humans than we initially thought." As Randy coordinated the efforts to stabilize the core, Dr. Kroll approached Admiral Kraz, his face flushed with excitement despite the dire circumstances. "Admiral," he whispered urgently, "I've made a remarkable discovery about the pack-led traitor Orion. The prolonged contact with the human has triggered unprecedented biochemical changes in her physiology. This could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies compatibility." Kraz's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with the implications. "Continue your research discreetly, Doctor. This information could be crucial for future negotiations." Their hushed conversation was interrupted by a violent tremor that shook the facility. Sparks erupted from a nearby console as a group of armed pack leads burst into the engineering sector. "It's Zork's loyalists," Captain Gordon shouted, drawing her weapon. "They're trying to sabotage the repairs." Gordon's team sprang into action, taking up defensive positions around the critical systems. The air filled with the sharp report of energy weapons as the two factions exchanged fire. Amidst the chaos, Randy and Orion remained focused on the task at hand. They worked in perfect synchronicity, their movements fluid and coordinated as if they shared a single mind. "We've almost got it," Randy muttered, his fingers flying over the control panel. "Just need to stabilize the containment field." Suddenly, a warning klaxon blared, drowning out all other noise. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a schematic of the power core's innermost chamber. "The radiation levels are off the charts," Orion gasped, her face pale. "We can't complete the stabilization process remotely. Someone needs to go in there and do it manually." Randy's eyes sharp in steadfast perseverance. "I'll do it," he said, already moving towards the chamber entrance. Orion grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Randy, no! The radiation! It could kill you!" He turned to face her, his expression softening. "I have to try. If that core goes critical, we all die." Orion's grip tightened, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I can't lose you. I care for you, Randy, more than I thought possible." Randy's heart raced, not just from the danger, but from the intensity of Orion's words. He cupped her face gently, acutely aware of Admiral Kraz and Dr. Kroll watching their exchange. "I care for you too," he said softly. "That's why I have to do this, to save you, to save everyone." Captain Gordon stepped forward, her face etched with concern. "Porter, let me go. You've already been through enough." Randy shook his head. "With all due respect, Captain, I'm the best choice. My exposure to pack-led technology gives me the edge we need." Orion, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, hurried to a nearby storage unit. She returned with an odd assortment of pack-led gear. "It's not much," she said, helping Randy into the makeshift radiation suit, "but it should offer some protection." As Randy prepared to enter the chamber, the firefight between Gordon's team and Zork's loyalists intensified. Energy bolts ricocheted off walls, filling the air with the acrid smell of ozone. Randy took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He looked at Orion one last time, trying to memorize every detail of her face. "Guide me through this," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Orion nodded, activating a communication link. "Always," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. The chamber door hissed open, revealing a hellish glow of terrifying energy. Randy stepped inside, the door sealing behind him with a foreboding clang. As he moved deeper into the chamber, Randy could feel the heat even through his protective gear. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he approached the pulsing core. "Talk to me, Orion," he said, his voice slightly distorted through the comlink. "What am I looking at?" Orion's voice came through, tense but focused. "You should see a series of control rods surrounding the central matrix. We need to realign them manually to stabilize the containment field." Randy's hands moved swiftly, following Orion's instructions. As he worked, he became acutely aware of a tingling sensation spreading through his body. The radiation was already starting to affect him, despite the suit's protection. Outside the chamber, the battle had taken an unexpected turn. General Zork, watching the live feed of Randy's heroic efforts, found himself questioning everything he believed about human inferiority. Some of his loyalists, equally moved, began to lower their weapons. "Look at him," Zork muttered, his voice barely audible. "He's sacrificing himself. For all of us." As Randy neared completion of the stabilization process, the facility's alarms began to quiet. The tremors subsided, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the engineering sector. "You did it, Randy," Orion's joyful voice came through the comm. "The core is stabilizing. Get out of there now." Randy turned to leave, his movements sluggish from fatigue and radiation exposure. He stumbled towards the chamber door, his vision beginning to blur. "Orion," he croaked, "the door, it's not opening." Panic erupted outside as Orion and the Packlet engineers frantically worked to override the jammed door mechanism. Inside the chamber, Randy slumped against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Stay with me, Randy," Orion pleaded through the comm, her fingers flying over the control panel. "We're going to get you out. Just hold on." As consciousness began to slip away, Randy's thoughts turned to Orion, to the connection they had forged. He smiled faintly, hoping that somehow their bond might lead to a brighter future for both their peoples. The last thing he heard before darkness claimed him was the sound of metal groaning, the chamber door slowly beginning to open. Open. The sudden rush of cool air into the chamber was a stark contrast to the oppressive heat Randy had endured. He collapsed forward, his body limp and unresponsive. "Randy!" Orion's voice cracked with emotion as she rushed to his side. She cradled his head gently, her eyes scanning his radiation-ravaged form. "We need medical assistance now." As the medical team swarmed around Randy's unconscious body, Dr. Kroll pushed his way through the crowd, his face a mask of concern and scientific curiosity. "Wait," he called out, holding up a hand to halt the medics. "We can't risk moving him. The radiation levels in his body are off the charts." Captain Gordon stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "What are you suggesting, Doctor? We can't just leave him here." Dr. Kroll's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I have a prototype, a teleportation device. It's experimental, but it might be our only chance to save him." Admiral Kraz, who had been observing the scene with a grim expression, nodded slowly. "Do it. We've come too far to lose him now." As the Packlet engineers scrambled to set up the teleportation device, General Zork emerged from the shadows. His face, once contorted with hatred, now bore an expression of grudging respect. I was wrong," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "This human's bravery, it shames me. Let me help." Orion looked up at Zork, surprise evident in her eyes. She nodded, gesturing for him to join the rescue effort. The former enemies worked side by side, their shared goal temporarily bridging the gap between their species. Dr. Kroll's hands flew over the controls of the teleportation device, his brow beaded with sweat. "It's ready," he announced, his voice tense. "But I must warn you, this has never been tested on a human subject. The risks are—" "Just do it," Orion interrupted, her eyes never leaving Randy's pale face. "We're out of options." The air crackled with energy as Dr. Kroll activated the device. A blinding flash of light filled the room, followed by a deafening boom that shook the entire facility. The lights flickered and died, plunging everyone into darkness. For a moment, there was only silence and the acrid smell of ozone. Then slowly, the emergency lights sputtered to life, casting an eerie glow over the scene. Where Randy had lain moments before, there was now only an empty space. Panic gripped the onlookers until a soft moan drew their attention to the other side of the room. There, sprawled on the floor, was Randy. But he was changed. His skin emitted a faint, pulsating glow, and his veins shimmered with an otherworldly light. Orion rushed to his side, her heart pounding. "Randy, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then locking onto Orion's face. What happened?" he croaked, his voice weak but unmistakably alive. Dr. Kroll pushed his way through the crowd, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. "Fascinating," he murmured, running a scanner over Randy's glowing form. "The combination of extreme radiation exposure and the teleportation process has triggered a unique cellular transformation. I've never seen anything like it." Captain Gordon stepped forward, her face a mix of relief and concern. "Is he stable? Can we move him now?" Dr. Kroll nodded absently, his eyes still fixed on his scanner. Yes, he's no longer emitting dangerous levels of radiation, but we need to get him to the medical bay immediately for further study." As the medical team carefully lifted Randy onto a stretcher, Admiral Kraz cleared his throat. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the pack-led leader. "Today we have witnessed something extraordinary," Kraz began, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "A human willingly risked his life to save not just his own people, but ours as well. In light of this, I am declaring an immediate ceasefire." A murmur of surprise rippled through the assembled crowd. Kraz held up a hand for silence before continuing. "Furthermore, I propose the formation of a joint human pack-led scientific commission to study the potential benefits of Randy Porter's transformation. This could be the beginning of a new era of cooperation between our species." Captain Gordon stepped forward, her posture tense but her voice steady. "Admiral Kraz, while we appreciate this gesture, I must insist on the safe return of my team and the human scientists who had previously defected." Kraz nodded solemnly. "Of course, Captain. Consider it done. This is a time for healing old wounds, not creating new ones." As Randy was wheeled towards the medical bay, Orion never left his side. She noticed with a mix of fascination and concern that her own skin seemed to tingle where it made contact with Randy's. Something was changing within her as well, a subtle shift that both excited and terrified her. Dr. Kroll, following close behind, was already formulating theories. "The biochemical reaction between them is accelerating," he muttered to himself, making notes on a datapad. "This could lead to an entirely new form of human pack-led symbiosis." As they entered the medical bay, alarms began to sound throughout the facility. Captain Gordon's communicator crackled to life. "Captain," a breathless voice reported, "we're picking up multiple incoming signatures. It's a human diplomatic envoy, and more pack-led ships have just dropped out of warp." Gordon and Kraz exchanged glances. The stakes had just been raised significantly. Whatever happened next would shape the future of human pack-led relations for generations to come. In the medical bay, Randy's eyes fluttered open once more. He looked down at his glowing hands, flexing his fingers experimentally. To his amazement, he found he could control the intensity of the radiation emanating from his body. "Orion," he whispered, his voice a mix of wonder and fear. "What's happening to me?" Orion squeezed his hand, her own subtle changes momentarily forgotten in the face of Randy's more dramatic transformation. "I don't know," she admitted softly. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together." As the human diplomatic envoy and additional pack-led scientists began to arrive on Zeta 9, the air thrummed with tension and possibility. The fate of two species hung in the balance, with Randy and Orion's unique bond at the center of it all. The next few hours would determine whether this crisis would lead to war or usher in an unprecedented era of interspecies cooperation and scientific advancement. As the human diplomatic envoy and additional pack-led ships arrived at Zeta 9, the research facility transformed into a bustling center of scientific and political activity. The once tense atmosphere now crackled with a different kind of energy, one of possibility and cautious optimism. Randy Porter, still lying on the medical bed, flexed his fingers experimentally. The soft glow emanating from his skin pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He turned to Dr. Kroll, who was furiously scribbling notes on his datapad. "Doctor," Randy said, his voice stronger now, "I can control it. The radiation, I mean." Dr. Kroll's eyes widened. He quickly set up a series of radiation detectors around Randy's bed. Fascinating. Can you demonstrate? Randy nodded, closing his eyes in concentration. The glow intensified, causing the detectors to chirp rapidly. Then, with a deep breath, he dimmed the radiation until it was barely perceptible. Incredible, Dr. Kroll breathed. He turned to the mixed team of human and pack-led scientists who had gathered in the medical bay. We need to begin a full battery of tests immediately. As the scientists swarmed around Randy, Orion stood quietly in the corner, her brow furrowed. She could feel a tingling sensation spreading through her body, centered on the hand that had touched Randy earlier. She flexed her fingers, noticing a faint shimmer beneath her skin. Captain Gordon entered the medical bay, her face a mask of professionalism despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Mr. Porter, how are you feeling?" Randy sat up, surprising himself with how easy it felt. "Better than I should, Captain. Whatever happened in there, it changed me." Gordon nodded, her eyes flicking to the readings on the medical equipment. "So I see. We've got a situation developing outside. The human diplomatic envoy has arrived, and more pack-led ships have entered orbit. Things are about to get very complicated." As if on cue, Admiral Kraz entered the room, flanked by several pack-led officials and human diplomats. The group paused, taking in the sight of the glowing human on the bed. Kraz stepped forward, his voice solemn. "What we have witnessed here today is nothing short of miraculous. It presents us with an unprecedented opportunity." He turned to face the assembled group. "I propose the establishment of a joint human pack-led colony right here on Zeta 9, a place where our species can work together, learn from each other, and perhaps evolve together." The room erupted in a flurry of whispers and exclamations. Captain Gordon raised her hand, silencing the crowd. "Admiral, while I appreciate the gesture, this is a decision that requires careful consideration and approval from both our governments." Kraz nodded. "Of course, Captain. But I believe what we've seen here today, a human risking everything to save both our peoples, and emerging changed in ways we're only beginning to understand, is a sign that our futures are intertwined." As the diplomats began to debate the merits of Kraz's proposal, Dr. Kroll approached Orion. He had noticed her discomfort and the subtle changes in her appearance. "Are you all right?" he asked, scanner in hand. Orion held out her arm, revealing the shimmering patterns beneath her skin. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Ever since I touched Randy, I've felt different." Dr. Kroll's scanner hummed as he passed it over her arm. His eyes widened as he read the results. "This is remarkable," he muttered. "Your cellular structure is undergoing changes similar to Randy's, albeit at a slower rate. It seems there's some sort of symbiotic reaction occurring between you two." Across the room, Randy's head snapped up. He locked eyes with Orion, a jolt of electricity seeming to pass between them. In that moment, he could sense her confusion, her fear, and underneath it all, a growing excitement. "I can feel her," Randy said, his voice filled with wonder. "Orion, I can sense what you're feeling." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to the pair. Dr. Kroll looked from Randy to Orion and back, his mind racing with the implications. "This changes everything," he said softly. Suddenly, the door to the medical bay slid open, revealing General Zork. The pack-led officer, once so vehemently opposed to humans, now wore an expression of humility and commitment. "I have a request," Zork announced, his gaze fixed on Randy. "I wish to undergo the same treatment that transformed you. If we are to bridge the gap between our species, let us do so in body as well as in spirit." The assembled humans and pack-leds stared at Zork in shock. Randy sat up straighter, studying the general's face. "You understand the risks?" he asked. "We don't even know the full extent of what's happened to me." Zork nodded solemnly. "I do, but I've seen the bravery and sacrifice you've shown. If there's a chance this can help bring our peoples together, it's a risk I'm willing to take." As the implications of Zork's request sank in, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Captain Gordon's communicator crackled to life. "Captain!" a frantic voice shouted over the din. "We've detected multiple unauthorized entries into the facility's power systems. It looks like we're dealing with a group of extremists. Randy swung his legs off the bed, standing tall despite the chaos erupting around him. He locked eyes with Orion, feeling their newfound connection pulse between them. "Looks like Zork's treatment will have to wait," he said grimly. "We've got a facility to defend." As Randy and Orion moved towards the door, their bodies seemed to move in perfect synchronization. The shimmering energy beneath their skin intensified, casting an otherworldly glow around them. They stepped out into the corridor, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, their unique bond now the linchpin in the fragile peace between humans and Pakleds. Behind them, Dr. Kroll and his team scrambled to secure their research data, while Captain Gordon and Admiral Kraz began coordinating their forces. The fate of two species hung in the balance, with the glowing figures of Randy and Orion leading the charge into an uncertain future. Randy and Orion raced through the corridors of the facility, their newly synchronized movements carrying them swiftly towards the source of the commotion. As they rounded the corner to the medical bay, they skidded to a halt, confronted by a scene of chaos and anguish. General Zork lay on the floor, his body convulsing violently as waves of intense radiation pulsed from his form. Dr. Kroll and a team of human and Pakled scientists huddled around him, their faces masks of concentration and growing desperation as they struggled to stabilize his condition. "What happened?" Randy shouted over the blaring alarms, his eyes fixed on the writhing general. Dr. Kroll looked up, his face pale with worry. "He attempted to replicate your transformation using our preliminary data. The process is highly unstable. We can't contain the radiation." Randy's mind raced, drawing on his own experience of transformation. Without hesitation, he strode forward, gently pushing aside the scientists. "Randy, wait!" Orion called out, but he had already reached Zork's side. Randy placed his hands on the general's heaving chest, closing his eyes in concentration. He could feel the chaotic energy coursing through Zork's body, far more volatile than his own transformation had been. Drawing on his newfound abilities, Randy began to absorb the excess radiation, redirecting it through his own body. The effort was immense, causing Randy's form to glow brighter with each passing second. Sweat beaded on his brow as he fought to control the surging power. Orion, linked to Randy through their strange bond, sensed his struggle. Without a word, she moved to his side, placing her hands over his. The moment their skin made contact, a visible energy field sprang into existence around Zork's body. Together, they worked to stabilize the general, their combined efforts creating a mesmerizing dance of light and energy. The radiation alarms throughout the facility reached a fever pitch, their urgent wailing echoing through every corridor. In the command center, Admiral Kraz's face was grim as he watched the readings spike to dangerous levels. "Evacuate all non-essential personnel immediately," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't risk further exposure." Captain Gordon sprung into action, coordinating the evacuation efforts. "Move in an orderly fashion," she called out, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "Humans and pack leads, proceed to your designated evacuation points." Back in the medical bay, Zork's eyes flickered open, finding focus on Randy's face. Despite the pain racking his body, the general managed to grasp Randy's arm. "Porter," Zork gasped, his voice barely audible above the alarms. I was wrong. About humans. About everything." He coughed, a spasm of pain crossing his features. "There is hope for us. Together." Before Randy could respond, Zork's body suddenly went rigid. A massive surge of energy built within him, threatening to overwhelm Randy and Orion's efforts. "Hold on!" Randy shouted, gritting his teeth as he redoubled his efforts to contain the burst. Orion's grip on his hands tightened, her own body glowing brighter as she channeled more of her power into the protective barrier. The surge hit with devastating force, washing over them in waves of searing radiation. Randy and Orion's bodies began to change rapidly, their forms becoming more luminescent and translucent as they evolved to handle the intense energy. For what seemed like an eternity, the three figures were engulfed in a blinding cocoon of light. Then, as suddenly as it began, the energy surge subsided. Randy, Orion, and Zork collapsed to the floor, their bodies intertwined and pulsating with a soft, ethereal glow. Dr. Kroll and the other scientists approached cautiously, their instruments indicating that the radiation levels had stabilized. As they watched in amazement, all three began to stir. Randy was the first to open his eyes, blinking in confusion as he took in the changed appearance of his hands. Beside him, Orion sat up slowly, her gaze locking with his in shared wonder. Zork groaned, pushing himself to a sitting position. The general's eyes widened as he looked down at his transformed body, then back to Randy and Orion. What has happened to us?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and trepidation. Dr. Kroll stepped forward, his scanner humming as he passed it over the trio. "Fascinating," he breathed, studying the readings. "Your physiologies have merged, creating a perfect blend of human and Packled traits. The radiation you're emitting, it's completely benign. In fact, it appears to have healing properties." As the implications of their transformation began to sink in, Randy felt a strange sensation in his mind. He could sense Orion's thoughts, her emotions, as clearly as his own. More surprisingly, he found he could understand Zork's mental processes with perfect clarity. "We're connected," Orion said softly, voicing the realization they all shared. "Not just physically, but mentally." Zork nodded, a look of wonder crossing his face. "I can see now, truly see, the beauty of our differences, the potential of our unity." As news of the extraordinary development spread throughout the facility, both human and Packled leaders gathered to witness the results firsthand. Admiral Kraz and Captain Gordon entered the medical bay, their expressions a mix of caution and hope. "What we've seen here today," Kraz began, his voice solemn, "is nothing short of miraculous. It is a sign that our futures are indeed intertwined." Captain Gordon nodded in agreement. "The joint colony proposal for Zeta-9, I believe it's time we move forward with it. With your unique abilities and understanding, you three would be the ideal founders and leaders." Randy, Orion, and Zork exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. They stood together, their bodies glowing with a soft, reassuring light. "We accept," Randy said, speaking for all three. "This is just the beginning of what we can achieve together." As the gravity of the moment settled over the room, Dr. Kroll cleared his throat. "There's still much to learn about your new physiology," he said, his scientific curiosity evident in his voice. "With your permission, I'd like to continue studying the effects of this transformation. It could hold the key to even greater advancements in human-Packled relations." Randy nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Of course, Doctor. After all, this journey of discovery is far from finished." Outside the medical bay, the sounds of the facility returning to normal operations could be heard. The crisis had passed, but the impact of what had transpired would be felt for generations to come. As Randy, Orion, and Zork prepared to face their new roles, the future of human-Packled relations looked brighter than ever before.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.